I knew my new neighbors were going to be a problem the second they started taking pictures of my property like they were scouting land for a luxury resort or something. Didn't even wave back when I said good morning. Just stood there in matching black sunglasses beside their shiny white Tesla, whispering to each other while staring at my fence line like I was violating some imaginary HOA code that didn't even exist out here. See, I live about 40 minutes outside Nashville, out where people mind their business, raise chickens, burn brush piles on weekends, and don't call the county because somebody's grass got too tall. I bought those 6 acres back in 2018 after my divorce, fixed the land up myself, planted peach trees, built a greenhouse, the whole deal. It became the first place in my life that actually felt peaceful. Then the Whitmores moved in. Caleb and Vanessa Whitmore, both remote tech consultants from Seattle, late 20s, maybe early 30s, the kind of people who say things like curated outdoor living space instead of backyard. They bought the old Jenkins property next to mine and immediately started renovating it into one of those modern farmhouse influencer homes. Black trim, giant windows, contractor trucks coming in every day at sunrise. At first I figured, all right, city people moving rural, happens all the time. Some adjust, some don't. But these two acted like the entire county was beneath them. Every conversation felt like they were tolerating me instead of talking to me. Caleb especially had this smug little half-smile, like he thought owning expensive hiking boots made him qualified to lecture actual country people about land use. Then one Tuesday evening, I came back from picking up feed supplies and saw 12 giant contractor trash bags dumped along the back edge of my pasture. Not near the line, not accidentally crossing over. I mean fully on my side, a good 20 feet in. Old drywall, rotten food, busted shelving, broken lamps, coffee grounds leaking through the plastic. The whole place smelled like hot garbage baking under Tennessee heat. I stood there for a second just staring at it because honestly, when somebody disrespects you that casually, your brain almost rejects it at first. Like, no, surely nobody's this arrogant. But then I noticed the Amazon boxes inside one bag still had their address labels on them. So I walked over there, calmly, knocked on the door. Caleb opened it holding one of those little espresso cups like he was in a commercial. I said, "Hey man, you dumped trash on my property." And this dude actually shrugged, then goes, "We assumed that section wasn't being actively used." I remember blinking at him because the sentence was so stupid it almost impressed me. I said, "That's because it's a pasture. You know land." Vanessa appeared behind him and crossed her arms, immediately defensive, like somehow I was bothering them. Caleb smirked and said, "Well, there's no visible fencing there." That's when I realized exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. The kind who think if something looks quiet or unclaimed, they can take advantage of it. I told him real slow, "No HOA out here, buddy. Property lines still count." Then he just nodded once and closed the door in my face. Didn't apologize. Didn't offer to clean it up. Nothing. And I'll be honest, standing there on that porch listening to their smart lock click shut, I felt that little shift happen inside me. That moment where you stop seeing somebody as rude and start seeing them as dangerous. Because disrespect like that doesn't stay small. It grows. Sure enough, I spent the next morning hauling every bag into my trailer, paying nearly $100 at the county dump, sweating through my shirt while cleaning up somebody else's mess like I was their unpaid maintenance guy. But I documented everything, photos, receipts, timestamps. Sent them a certified invoice for disposal costs too. Figured maybe once money got involved they'd wake up and act like adults. They ignored it completely. No response. No check. Nothing. And 3 weeks later, they escalated. I came home from my sister's place on a Sunday afternoon and nearly slammed my brakes through the gravel driveway because sitting in the middle of my field was a giant stained sectional couch. Cushions ripped open, stuffing blowing across the grass, and beside it were paint cans, broken tile, wood scraps, busted sink fixtures. Looked like they'd demoed an entire bathroom and decided my pasture was cheaper than a landfill. That's the moment I stopped trying to be neighborly. Because dumping garbage once could maybe be ignorance, twice? That's disrespect on purpose. And people who disrespect you on purpose usually think you won't do anything about it. That was their first mistake. Now let me pause the story for a second because this right here is where a lot of people make the wrong move emotionally. They either explode too early or they roll over and tolerate behavior that only gets worse. And trust me, people like Caleb and Vanessa count on that hesitation. This is a psychological trap a lot of entitled neighbors create without even realizing it consciously. They start with a small violation to test boundaries. Not because they desperately need extra space for trash, but because they want to see if you'll defend your territory or quietly absorb the inconvenience to avoid conflict. Once you do that, in their mind, the boundary shifts. According to standard procedure in most rural counties, illegal dumping becomes a serious issue the second you can prove repeated trespassing and documented disposal costs. That's why I photographed everything instead of going full rage mode and dragging the couch through their living room window like my temper briefly suggested. From a legal perspective, property disputes are won with paperwork, timestamps, surveys, receipts, and patience, not screaming matches on somebody's driveway. And honestly, HOA culture plays into this mindset too, even when there's technically no HOA involved. Some people move from tightly controlled suburban neighborhoods into rural areas carrying this weird assumption that open land equals unused land, and unused land equals available land. They mistake quietness for weakness. Big mistake. The lesson here is simple. If somebody violates your boundaries once and faces zero consequences, they usually don't become more respectful. They become more comfortable. And by the time that realization finally hits you, the situation's already 10 times uglier than it needed to be. So after the second dumping incident, I called my attorney, Wayne Mercer, retired county prosecutor, Vietnam vet, the kind of old-school guy who still keeps paper files stacked in metal cabinets and says things like, "Give me the facts, not the feelings." Wayne had handled some contract stuff for me years earlier when I leased part of my land for hay storage, and the reason I trusted him was simple. He never overreacted. If Wayne looked concerned, you paid attention. I drove into town with a folder full of photos, dump receipts, timestamps, even screenshots from my trail cameras. He sat there quietly flipping through everything while chewing mint gum, then finally leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, they're screwed." That's the exact phrase he used. Not, "You may have a case." Not lawyer talk, just flat out screwed. He explained that repeated dumping combined with documented trespassing changed the entire situation legally, especially because they'd ignored certified notice. That mattered. Wayne drafted a formal demand letter that same afternoon, requiring immediate cleanup reimbursement, damages for soil contamination, trespassing penalties, and restoration costs for the torn-up pasture. We sent it certified mail with delivery confirmation. 3 days later, Caleb responded through some expensive law firm out of Portland, which honestly told me everything I needed to know about these people. Because instead of apologizing like normal adults, they escalated straight into rich people legal arrogance. The letter claimed the property line was visually ambiguous and argued they had been utilizing apparently abandoned open land in good faith. I remember reading that sentence twice and laughing so hard I nearly spilled coffee on Wayne's desk. Good faith. They dumped a moldy sectional sofa beside my peach trees and called it good faith. Wayne didn't laugh, though. He just tapped the paper and said, "Perfect." They admitted to it. Then he filed the lawsuit. Trespassing, illegal dumping, property damage, cleanup costs, attorney fees. Total claim just over $14,000. Hearing date scheduled 3 weeks out. And that's where things got interesting, because during those 3 weeks, I started planning something. See, I'm not a violent person. Never been in a fistfight past high school. But I do believe actions should have consequences people can physically see. Caleb and Vanessa treated my land like a dumpster because dumping things out of sight felt convenient to them. So I decided convenience was over. I drove to a wholesale storage supplier 2 counties over and bought 48 heavy-duty clear plastic storage bins with locking lids. Cost me almost $1,000. The cashier actually asked if I was opening a warehouse. I just smiled and said, something like that. Then for the next 4 days, I sorted every single item they'd dumped onto my property. And I mean meticulously. Drywall in one category, paint materials in another, broken fixtures separated by room type. I wore gloves, cataloged everything, numbered each container with giant black labels, photographed contents individually like evidence for a crime documentary. Because that's exactly what it was. Evidence. Every rotten cushion, every cracked tile, every fast food wrapper with their address attached. I even cleaned some of the bins before loading them because I wanted this whole thing to feel organized, intentional. That's what scared people more than anger anyway, calmness. Meanwhile, the Whitmores kept acting untouchable. Contractors still coming and going. Vanessa jogging every morning with her wireless headphones, completely ignoring me whenever she passed near the fence line. Caleb spent weekends building some giant outdoor pergola while his friends drank craft beer on the patio. They genuinely thought expensive lawyers and smug confidence would carry them through this. And honestly, that mindset is more common than people think. Some folks confuse money with immunity. They believe rules are flexible as long as you speak confidently enough. But rural counties don't always work like corporate boardrooms. Judges out there care about documentation, property rights, and whether somebody acted like a decent neighbor. The Whitmores failed all three. The morning before the hearing, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., drank coffee in complete silence, and backed my rented box truck up to the barn. Cool fog hanging over the pasture, headlights cutting through the dark, chickens barely awake yet. Honestly, it felt weirdly peaceful considering what I was about to do. I loaded every single container carefully into the truck, stacking them like inventory shipments. Took nearly 2 hours. Then right at sunrise, I drove over to the Whitmore's property. Their fancy security lights clicked off as I rolled up the driveway. And look, technically speaking, I never crossed any legal lines. That part matters. I didn't damage their property, didn't threaten them, didn't dump loose trash everywhere. I simply returned their belongings, one organized container at a time. I started unloading bins directly across their front porch and walkway, stacking them shoulder-high in neat rows. Clear containers, too, so every disgusting item remained fully visible. Moldy couch cushions, paint cans, splintered lumber, half-empty protein shake bottles. The whole ugly collection. By the time I finished, their front entrance looked like a forensic evidence display at a landfill convention. Completely blocked. You couldn't even reach the smart doorbell anymore. And right as I placed the final container down, the front door suddenly jerked open halfway before slamming into the wall of stacked bins. Caleb's face appeared through the gap, and I swear I've never seen a human being transition from confusion to rage that fast in my life. "What the hell is this?" he yelled. I stepped back calmly and said, "Just returning property you left on my land." Vanessa came rushing behind him wearing silk pajamas and holding her phone already recording me. "You're insane," she snapped. "We're calling the police." I nodded and said, "Good idea." That line really seemed to bother Caleb because arrogant people hate when you're calm. They need you emotional so they can frame themselves as the reasonable ones. About 15 minutes later, a county deputy rolled up. Older guy named Deputy Harlan, knew me casually from town. He listened to both sides, while Caleb practically foamed at the mouth explaining how I was harassing them and obstructing access to their home. Then Harlan asked me one question. "These items all came from your property?" I handed him the photos, the receipts, the certified letters, the lawsuit paperwork. Harlan spent maybe 30 seconds flipping through the file before exhaling through his nose like a disappointed father. Then he looked directly at Caleb and said, "Sir, this appears to be your debris." Caleb started rambling about disputed property lines again, and that's when Harlan delivered the sentence that basically ended the entire argument. Property disputes don't give you permission to dump construction waste on somebody else's land. Silence. Pure silence. Vanessa lowered her phone. Caleb's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Then Harlan added, almost casually, "Far as I can tell, he's returning your property in sealed containers. Civil matter." And just like that, game over. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I hated them. Honestly, by that point, I just wanted them to understand something basic. Rural doesn't mean weak. Quiet people aren't pushovers. And respect goes both directions. The next morning was the court hearing. Small county courthouse, fluorescent lighting, stale coffee smell, old wooden benches carved with initials from 30 years ago. Judge Eleanor Pike presiding. Sharp woman, no patience for nonsense. Caleb arrived wearing a tailored navy suit like he was heading into a Silicon Valley investor meeting. Vanessa sat beside him clutching a leather binder while their attorney shuffled papers nervously. Wayne showed up in cowboy boots carrying a single legal pad. That contrast alone almost made me smile. Proceedings started simple enough. Wayne presented photos chronologically, starting with the initial garbage bags, then the sectional couch incident, then the disposal invoices and legal notices. The judge barely interrupted because honestly the evidence spoke for itself. Then Caleb's attorney tried pivoting toward the unclear property boundary argument again. Big mistake. Judge Pike immediately pulled county survey records onto her monitor and zoomed into the parcel maps right there in court. The surveyed markers appear legally registered and visible, she said flatly. Then she looked directly at Caleb. Did you or did you not place refuse materials onto the plaintiff's property on multiple occasions? Caleb hesitated, which is death in courtrooms, because innocent people answer fast. Finally he muttered, "We believe the land was unused." And I'll never forget the judge's expression after hearing that. She leaned back slightly and said, "Unused does not mean unowned." Man, you could feel the air leave the room after that sentence. Final ruling came maybe 20 minutes later. Full judgment in my favor. Damages, cleanup reimbursement, attorney fees, mandatory professional survey installation with permanent boundary markers at the Whitmore's expense. Total amount just under 15 grand. Vanessa actually started crying quietly, while Caleb stared forward completely frozen, like his brain couldn't process losing to a guy with muddy work boots and a chicken coop. But the part nobody talks about? The aftermath. Because after all that drama, peace came back. Survey crews installed massive steel boundary posts along the property line 2 weeks later, impossible to miss now. Contractors stopped cutting across my pasture. No more trash. No more smug little comments. The Whitmores barely even made eye contact after that. About 6 months later, I heard they sold the property and moved back to Colorado. And honestly, good. Some people aren't built for rural life because they never understand the unwritten rule holding places like this together. Respect the land. Respect boundaries. Respect your neighbors. Ignore those rules long enough. Eventually somebody teaches the lesson the hard way. Looking back now, the crazy part isn't even the trash anymore. It's how fast small disrespect can snowball once somebody convinces themselves there won't be consequences. Because that's really what this whole situation was about underneath the garbage bags and court filings. Entitlement. Caleb and Vanessa didn't see themselves as bad people. That's important. Most people who cross boundaries don't wake up twirling mustaches thinking, "How can I become the villain today?" They justify it. They tell themselves the other person probably won't mind, or the land isn't being used properly, or their own convenience matters more than somebody else's property rights. And once that mindset takes root, every new violation feels smaller than the last. This is a psychological trap people fall into constantly, especially in neighborhoods where appearances and status become part of someone's identity. They assume confidence equals correctness. It doesn't. According to standard procedure in most property disputes, the person who stays calm, documents everything, and follows legal channels usually wins in the long run, even if they don't look powerful on the surface. That's the part social media never shows, because rage gets clicks faster than patience. But patience is what actually protects you. From a legal perspective, I got lucky in one sense. I had clear survey records, good documentation, and a judge who didn't tolerate games. A lot of people lose these battles simply because they react emotionally too soon and destroy their own credibility. Trust me, there were moments I wanted to handle things differently. Moments I wanted to drag that nasty couch straight through Caleb's expensive patio doors. But had I done that, suddenly I become the aggressor, and the real issue gets buried under emotional chaos. The lesson here is simple. Boundaries matter, even the quiet, invisible ones. Property lines, personal respect, basic decency. Once people learn they can ignore those things without resistance, they usually keep pushing until somebody finally pushes back harder. And honestly, that's why I'm telling this story. Not because of the money, not even because of the revenge, though I'd be lying if I said seeing those bins stacked on their front porch wasn't deeply satisfying, but because too many decent people let themselves get bullied trying to avoid conflict. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is calmly remind somebody that your kindness was never weakness. Anyway, I'm curious what you guys think. Would you have handled this differently? Would you have gone nuclear way earlier? Or tried harder to keep the peace? And be honest, was returning every piece of trash in organized containers petty or professional? Because personally, I still think the labels were a nice touch.